A question has been brought before the Word of YHWH about a sacred trust. The inquirer asks, YHWH, is the UT the original one held within the priestly family that is now held by Dallas Everette James? The draw opens with Luke chapter 1 verses 38 and 39. The angel departs, and Mary rises in those days and journeys with haste into the hill country of Judah. The text does not name what she carried. It names her movement, her obedience, and the direction into a city of covenant lineage. That motion sets the key for everything that follows. The sacred blessing of Judah declares, "Hear, YHWH, the voice of Judah, and bring him to his people," from Deuteronomy chapter 33, verse 7. The posture is affirmative, a sacred word received, and the recipient moves with purpose. Recognition is reverence, not direction. The ark may enter the camp, yet the camp that knew the ark was present still fell. 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 18. We note this at the threshold and proceed. The 100 verses unfold priesthood, inheritance, and identity, all converging around the object at the heart of this inquiry. The Ark of His Covenant appears by name. In Revelation chapter 11, verse 19, the temple of Elohim opens in heaven, and the ark is seen amid lightnings and earthquake. In 1 Kings chapter 8, verse 7, the cherubim spread their wings over the standing place of the ark, covering it and the bar poles. In Joshua chapter 6, verse 6, the priests take up the ark and bear it with 7 trumpets. The text names the ark, covers it, and commands it to be carried, anchoring the pattern in the actual words of Scripture. Priesthood speaks loudest through these drawn verses. Ezekiel chapter 44, verse 5 commands us to mark well the ordinances of the sanctuary and the entering in of the sacred place. 1 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 31 records Mattathiah, the Levite, firstborn of Shallum the Korahite, set over the things made in the pans. Aaron lifts his hands and blesses the people after the offerings. Leviticus chapter 9, verse 22. The consecrated firstborn belonged to YHWH by covenant decree. Exodus chapter 13, verses 11 and 12. And the ransoming of the firstborn who exceed the number of Levites is recounted in Numbers chapter 3, verse 46. Jubilees chapter 31, verse 5 prays that the seed may serve in his sanctuary as the holy ones. Custodianship over sacred things is not a matter of mere possession. It is woven into lineage, office, and ordinance. It is a priestly trust. Inheritance and identity converge with priesthood. The Dominion Triad signal reaches 7.34 sigma above the expected baseline, a strong anomaly far beyond random chance. Ezekiel chapter 46, verse 18 warns the prince not to thrust anyone from their covenant inheritance by oppression. Isaiah chapter 61, verse 8 declares YHWH loves judgment, hates robbery for the whole burnt offering, and will make an age-lasting covenant. Proverbs chapter 10, verse 22 says the sacred blessing of YHWH makes rich and adds no sorrow. These verses bind the question of what is held to how it is held, insisting that original custodianship and covenant integrity cannot be separated. Timing and appointed season run through the draw. Mary rises in those days. Daniel chapter 10, verse 12 tells us that from the first day he set his heart to understand, his words were heard. Leviticus chapter 25, verse 30 establishes that a house not redeemed within a full year changes hands permanently. Daniel chapter 9, verse 27 speaks of a covenant strengthened for 1 week. The pattern suggests that the answer is tied to an appointed moment when what has been guarded in one generation becomes manifest in another. A small but telling sign appears in Genesis chapter 8, verse 11. The pigeon returns with a freshly picked olive leaf. The seeker in Job chapter 31, verse 35 cries out, "Oh, that Shaddai would answer me, and my adversary had put things in writing." Psalm 94, verse 15 declares judgment will return to covenant faithfulness, and all the upright in heart will follow it. The draw answers these longings. Yet cautionary verses stand as Levitical sentinels at the gate. Job chapter 13, verse 9 asks sharply, Do you so mock him? 1 Kings chapter 21 verse 8 shows Jezebel writing letters in Ahab's name and sealing them with his seal, a counterfeit authority. Judges chapter 16 verse 10 records Delilah pressing Samson for the secret of his strength, and he does not disclose it. 1 Samuel chapter 4 verse 18 recounts how Eli fell backward and died at the mention of the ark after the glory had departed. Micah chapter 3 verse 5 warns of speakers who cry peace when nothing has been put into their mouths. Amos chapter 3 verse 10 indicts those who store violence and robbery in their palaces. Hosea chapter 10 verse 1 adds that Israel is an empty vine, sprouting fruit to itself and multiplying altars, a warning against self-made religion. These texts do not dominate the draw, but they are real and weighty. They caution against presumption, against using a borrowed seal, and against the error that the presence of a sacred object guarantees the presence of the Holy One. The ark was present at Shiloh, yet the camp fell. The mathematical framework confirms the direction of the text, though it never replaces it. The deterministic verdict is lean yes, with a probability of yes at 98.8%. The data shows a statistically confirmed non-random pattern across multiple independent channels. The convergence confidence index reaches 88% with all 6 channels active. The Dominion triad rises to over 1100% of the expected baseline, surviving false discovery correction. The global anomaly test yields p approximately 7.32 times 10 to the minus 15, confirming the thematic structure is not a random scatter. 23 direct textual hits anchor the pattern in Scripture with an 85% alignment to the question. These numbers confirm weight and coherence without claiming divine authorship or verifying external facts. The calibration remains uninformative, so this verdict is a direction for reverent inquiry, not a final certificate. Prospective replication is recommended to establish persistence. The E-value far exceeds the anytime valid confirmation threshold at alpha 0.05. The lead verse is affirmative, and the full draw resolves in the same direction with pastoral warning. The cautions do not invert the lean yes. They condition it on covenant integrity. The father appears to say yes to the lineage and the original character of this object, while calling the present holder to examine his heart. Joshua chapter 7 verse 19 pleads with Achan, "My son, give glory to YHWH and make confession. Hide it not from me." 2 Chronicles chapter 7 verse 17 sets the standard. "Walk before me as David your father walked, observing my statutes and my judgments." The one who holds this object must consecrate himself as YHWH is holy. Leviticus chapter 11 verse 44. Attention remains and must be acknowledged. An alternative reading could lift the robbery texts and the story of Eli as a direct challenge to the present custody. That reading is not suppressed. It is the second edge of the covenant sword. The voices are not contradictory, yet the dominant pattern is affirmative. The text supplies the vocabulary of original consecration, set office over sacred things, and an ark borne by priests, with an age-lasting covenant that hates robbery. The answer is yes, guarded by holiness. Between the porch and the altar, the text leans yes and stands watch. Luke chapter 24 verse 5 asks, "Why do you seek the living among the dead?" This is not a search for a lifeless relic, but a sacred trust that lives before YHWH. We offer this word back, trusting he will confirm what is true in his season. The verses drawn in this Shield 17.14 session were Luke chapter 1, verse 38 to 39, John chapter 1, verse 48, Job chapter 13, verse 9, Exodus chapter 21, verse 23 to 25, Exodus chapter 6, verse 14, Deuteronomy chapter 1, verse 13. This concludes today's interpretation under the Shield Protocol.